Hey, welcome back to the Kingsway Podcast.
Welcome.
Glad you are here. I had a stern, exciting thing to tell you. We have gathered a couple new podcast listeners.
Yeah.
Courtney Jones told me that she needs to be included as a avid listener and needs to be personally thanked.
This is for you, Courtney. This whole episode is about you.
I also heard Peyton and Josie. I'm getting all choked up about it.
Yeah, he is. If you're just listening to the audio and not watching the video, he is coughing with emotions.
I may be dead. We're coming back.
He's entering his Macho Man Randy Savage era.
That was a very emotional experience.
So Josie and Peyton are listening to this now. Yes. After this coughing fit, nobody's listening to this.
Dude, I am like,
I'm so
there's
sorry.
something right here. When they say there's a frog in your throat, I didn't know it was physically a frog that was in your throat. That's what it felt like. It felt like a physical frog.
I haven't drank a carbonated drink in a while, and that's what it feels like anytime you drink any
carbonated drink.
Yeah.
No, that is just purely when your esophagus forgets how to work. That's all that is. Like, you could be doing nothing. You could be swallowing air.
Your esophagus is on tornado drill.
Yes, and you're like, this is the worst. Luckily, that normally doesn't happen.
Unluckily, it did happen.
Unluckily,
we just spent a minute and a half talking about that.
Listen, it's not even gone. It's still stuck there.
I hear it. Do you need me to talk for a minute?
Sure.
Just to recover?
I'm going to try.
I don't know what to talk about other than to let you know that we are now, among all the other places we are, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and a bunch of other rando little podcast places, we are now on Pandora podcasts, because I heard from a listener that the only reason they have Spotify is for our podcasts.
Really?
Yes, that listener's name is Steven. The only reason they have Spotify is for our podcast, and otherwise everything they listen to is on Pandora. And Pandora does podcasts, and I didn't know that.
That's awesome.
So you're welcome, Pandora users.
Now I have fully recovered to a level that hopefully it will never happen again. We're continuing our Matthew, basically Sunday thing that I love to say the wrong thing.
Sunday.
Study hall.
Study hall.
I did it.
You did it.
And it's the last one. It's the last one because we've paused. Now, there may be another one that we throw in because I think John preached a sermon.
He did, and we didn't get that one recorded.
We haven't had time yet.
He had a lot of stuff going on before and after, and so
that's all right. We may catch that one, or that may be one that gets left out. But
we're going to take a break from the Gospel of Matthew for a moment in our Sunday morning service preaching time, which is why we do these in the first place. We do them because we love the Bible, but we have other Bible things. The reason we do these exact episodes are we preach about a passage on Sunday, and then we come here and we tell you more about it, hopefully.
Yeah, most passages, even the one we're going to talk about today, is like you can go so many different directions with it. There's so many things to talk about, so many angles, and even though this is probably one of the shorter texts that we've done in a few sermons, it's still incredibly full, and there's lots to make some assessments on. Kind of get excited about what could be there.
There's a lot behind the text.
Yes. Or in between the words.
Yeah.
Like there's
a lot under the text, and I don't mean on the other page that you see bleeding through your
it's the
super
standard,
thin
like
pages.
there's a lot between the lines. Like read between the lines in this because there's a lot. So I have to do this stupid 1 minute or 1 minute,
you do.
90-second thing.
You almost got out of it, but then you reminded me.
I did.
So thank you so much.
Partly because I had to do one over like 80 verses, and this is one that's only over like 12 or 14, and I was like, I want to be able to do one that's not 5,000 verses.
Yeah. Okay. So this is, again, for all of you who didn't hear the sermon, or it's been at least 4 minutes since you heard the sermon and you need a refresher. That way we're not recovering stuff that we've already covered in the same depth. Here we go. So wait, before we do that, the section heading in your Bible of this section, what is it?
Jesus walks on water.
Yep. So we're at that part where Jesus is walking on water.
Matthew 14, 22 through 36.
Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Jesus is found going right after, he says immediately, after he feeds the 5,000, sending his disciples in a boat, finds some private space, and he spends a night with God, just praying. And that's because obviously his friend John the Baptist has been killed and he hasn't had time to mourn him.
Friend and cousin.
Yes.
And honestly, one of the people who gets Jesus the best.
Absolutely.
Everybody else is like, who is this guy? But John the Baptist from the beginning. I'm taking up your time.
So then he has to catch up to the disciples and the wind's buffering. And guess what? He walks out on the water because why not? He's Jesus. He can do that. And of course, the disciples see him and they freak out, call him a ghost. And this is where the story starts to be just cool because they call him a ghost and they almost get it right because we know from Genesis 1 and John 1, Jesus was at the beginning of creation and this scene is very similar. Jesus is just walking on the water like the Spirit of God was in Genesis 1. Peter does this really crazy thing and he says, not come to me if it's who you are. It's let me come to you. And Peter walks out onto the water, which is crazy. All of this demonstrating that Jesus is more than just a man. All this a call to faith for Peter. And he comes to him, but then Peter doubts. And the whole sermon is based on this conversation that they have right in the middle. He saw the waves, and then he needed saving. And that became kind of the crux of this whole idea where Jesus says, you have little faith, why did you doubt? And he says, and then the wind dies down. And the end of the text is just the people on the other side of the island, or the other side of the lake, celebrating him as king. The whole point of the sermon is to say, Jesus will save you anytime you need it. Do not doubt that there is anything in this world that is not under the lordship of Christ, and that your faith is something that can be trusted more in him than anything you fear.
That's great. I gave you an extra 12 or 15 seconds because for the first time ever, I just started talking in the middle of your 90 seconds.
No, you're good.
I started talking. I was like, wait, this isn't my part.
Dude, what's funny is this text, I started the intro with this text and I preached by talking about how I think one of the harder things, the longer and older I get, the longer I do this, the older I get. There it is.
There we go.
I find that the texts that I was so excited to preach on when I was younger and I'd been starting were texts that I was familiar with and comfortable with. Yeah. And that had been preached and I'd heard preached because I felt like I could stay inside the guardrails and say something that was safe, but then also
you could say your version of something you've already heard.
Yes. But the older I get and the longer I do this type of stuff feels like we're wringing out a sponge that I've already jumped on 12 times. I'm like, what else can I say that has not been said about this text? And that to me becomes a challenge because then there's this temptation to get really creative and blah, blah, blah. And if you don't find something new or if it's not special, then somehow it's not worthy of being preached.
Yeah, that's definitely hard for me thinking about the Bible because I want to, and we will do this in this podcast episode because we get to, because it's what we get to do right now. But I want to pull out all the special threads that go between this and other texts in Scripture and how those texts set up tropes for what water is and what ghosts or spirits are and what God doing over water is and whatever. And I want to pull out all these hyperlinks. None of them necessarily change
the point.
So it's as deep as we want to go.
Yeah. And
the point is not that deep.
Well, and when you come off the stage after preaching something like this, people don't come up to you and go I've never thought of that before.
Yeah.
They come up to you and go, have you thought about this before? And they have a completely different angle or thought or thing that they've been preached on. And so it's always funny because you're even when you feel like you do find something that's a creative thing that's fun to talk about, I feel like there's 10 more because these have been preached so much.
Yeah.
This might be top 5 most known stories in the Bible just by lore alone, not maybe detail wise, but the idea that Jesus walks on water.
Yeah. It's like that, David and Goliath,
Mm-hmm.
because of Hal Lindsey and Tim LaHaye, The Rapture,
Mm-hmm.
which is sort of not in the Bible, but whatever. What else? What do you think? The flood?
Yeah, I mean, Christmas,
Adam and Eve.
Christmas Story because of Christmas
Story.
You know,
honestly, I think Adam and Eve is more well known to unchurched people.
Yeah, Adam and Eve's
Christmas.
Adam and Eve, Christmas.
The flood.
But I mean, even like the Christmas idea is like maybe not the details of it, but just like baby born in a manger, like that. You know what I mean? Like that idea.
Yeah.
And so like, I think what's so crazy about that though is like when you hear it quoted in like a sports context or like a song or a movie uses it as an illustration, you're starting to realize like this is something that people maybe they're not mocking, but they're at least like going like, yeah, it's crazy. You know, like, and they're using that type of like mysterious, mythical tone. And so to bring it back into the real world of like this really happened is a little bit harder because people are already like, yeah, it's not like you can walk on water. So approaching this, I kind of had two ideas in my head, and I leaned pretty heavily in my sermon on the concept of like, Jesus is extremely comfortable with wind and waves, and none of this scares him. And then two, I leaned into the idea of what happens to Peter when he comes out to Jesus. I've always read as supposed to be a convicting type of confrontation where Jesus says, "You have little faith. Why did you doubt?" I don't know why, but I always put a tone on that if I'm not careful of like a really angry dad or like a really angry coach or a really angry authority figure. And so it comes off like, why did you doubt? You know, you a little faith, you know, angry. And the more I read this and the more I guess I interact with the tone of Jesus in other places with people that were trying to show faith, he was encouraging. This was much more of a mother kneeling in front of a son or a daughter or a student-teacher relationship where they were like, "Oh, sweetie, you a little faith. Why did you doubt?" You know, and recognizing without Peter even telling Jesus what scared him, calming it. Yeah. And like showing his authority over it immediately.
I tend to agree with you. We're not saying that Jesus never gets mad at Peter.
No.
He says, "Get behind me, Satan," to Peter's face.
Not very long from here.
But like, I feel like this isn't really a deep dive thing, but the thing that makes me think the most about is like parents helping you with training wheels and like riding your bike and then riding it without training wheels.
Yeah.
Or parents like some place where your legs haven't worked much before, rock climbing or rollerblades, skates, whatever.
And that's what I meant by like, he's trying to do his faith thing. Like when he's confronted before, it's his agenda, his selfishness that Jesus is correcting. When anybody's attempting faith, like they're doing something in faith, he's always gentle with them. Like he's always encouraging, comforting, not, you know.
And leading them to trust him. Yeah. Faith is an expression of our trust in Jesus.
Exactly.
And when his faith faltered, Jesus just brought that up. What was it in me that you doubted?
Yes. And I think that was a very encouraging thing to me personally. It drove me to, I think, a question that I've never asked maybe before inside this story, which was, what are you focusing on right now that you believe Jesus doesn't have power over? Wrongly. Yeah. And the idea there is like Jesus has power over that. Like there's nothing that he can't and won't show and demonstrate that, if not now, you know, it's in the near future. And I think that was like a really like, I don't like that. That's a hard concept because in so many ways we limit God by our own limitations. So like if we haven't been able to defeat it, then surely, you know, or the world seems to have struggles with it, then we're like, well, God probably can't handle it because I can't handle it, my dad can't handle it, our country can't handle it, the world can't handle it, so God certainly can't handle it.
There's a big word for that, but I think the big word is helpful. When we think that God can't handle it because some humans I know can't handle it, we are, buckle up, anthropomorphizing God.
Placing human limitations on a divine being.
Or human traits.
Yes.
So Why is your car all smashed up? Well, a rock ran over it, or that's not a great example. Rock jumped on it. None of these are great examples, but where you describe oftentimes an inanimate object, or at least a non-person object with person qualities.
Yep.
Or your dog's being real annoying and barking, and you're like, he has to go outside. My dog was telling me they needed to go outside. They weren't like speaking English.
Yeah.
Maybe they were communicating, but by saying telling, you're sort of anthropomorphizing, whatever.
Yep.
But yeah, we turn to God and we anthropomorphize our limits onto him, or our attitudes onto him, our priorities onto him.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then it makes it feel easier to relate to. It makes it feel more controllable, more safe. I think that's the hard thing about this too, is like this story has mystery in it. Like why Jesus does it this way, why Peter gets out of the boat in the first place. Because that was like the first thing I had people come up and tell me, like, I love Peter because like he gets out of the boat. Like he's not like, come to me. He's like, let me come to you, you know? Yeah. And whether he's doing it for like selfish, like I just want to walk on water, or if he's like, so that we can walk on water, like that's an option. Like I want to do that, you know? Or if it's some crazy like fear that he's just like, I don't want to be in this boat when you can walk on water. This boat can't, you know, survive. Whatever the reasons, people love Peter because he's so ambitious in the sense of like, and courageous to just get out of the boat. I guess I just don't identify a lot with that, where I'm just kind of like, for no good reason, I'm just going to jump out of that boat. And like, it's not like there's someone out there that needs saving. You know what I mean? It's not like there's somebody out there that needs help. You're just like, I want to walk on water. And
it's, I think one good way to summarize it, and maybe this is wrong, this is just my best guess.
Yeah.
Is
definitely wrong. Yeah.
That one of the reasons that Jesus attracted a lot of people is something between fun and charisma and like care, where he's not always fun, he's not always lighthearted and whatever, but there's a side of him that like is enjoyable and safe and fun to be around sometimes. That's not an always characteristic. I don't think the Pharisees loved you brood of vipers, but like Jesus, one of his first miracles was water to wine at the wedding at Cana. And he didn't make watered down wine. He made the best wine.
The best wine.
And the best wine isn't the wine that gets the least people buzzed.
It's the one that goes people
but also the
hard.
flavor and the whatever. And I say all this to say that this is a good example, I think, of Peter in his rambunctious, like, quick to the gun way, of Peter at play.
Yep.
He's like goes from terrified to when he knows he's safe because he sees Jesus not worried about the storm and literally walking over the storm, which is impossible.
Yep.
That you go from it's every great movie moment where it's like an undefeatable enemy, but then the tides turn because of something and people just start like laugh crying because they know that the victory's won. And I can absolutely see Peter,
Avengers Assemble,
who's quick to speak and slow to listen, to be quick to play.
Yep.
I see Jesus out there. This storm isn't a big deal. I just saw Jesus feed 5,000 people. I've seen him do a bunch of unexplainable things. And this just seems like fun rather than imminent danger. Because it says, ahead of him on the other side, during the fourth watch of the night, which in my notes down here is like 3 to 6 a.m. So sleep deprived.
Oh, yeah.
In the middle of the night. It's 3 to 6 a.m. Whatever that means, it just means before sunrise, early in the morning. It could mean hours before sunrise because they didn't have watches.
Oh, yeah. No,
and
it's definitely dark. I think it's definitely
dark. It's the last night period of the watch before the sun comes out.
It's the scariest part of the day.
So you're sleep deprived. You've been paling water out of the boat. You've been worried for your life the whole time. So to go from fear to play, honestly, is totally foreseeable. And
like I said, I've wrung this out a lot, and so like I have like parts of this story that I absolutely love. First one is he gets out of the boat before the wind dies down. Like that's awesome. Trust in Jesus is there before anything changes. 2, he walks on water. which is wild. Like the fact that his faith is strong enough to trust that. I use like really thin ice as the illustration. You're just it worked.
Which is walking on water.
Exactly. And that was part of that was the closest I've ever done. You know? But then the thought of like Jesus saves him and the wind doesn't go away. So he cries out immediately, help me because he's sinking, and then Jesus saves him, but the wind hasn't died down yet. It's like the storm doesn't go away. The wind that scared him hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And then once they get to the boat and he steps in, the wind goes away.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's just kind of a cool little, like, if you think about it, a lot of times we think, oh, Jesus, let me walk on the water. And then it turns into like a crystal, like smooth pond.
Yeah.
And like, we're like, oh, sweet. And then we think, oh, Jesus saved me. And then as soon as he grabs him, the wind dies down. And it can feel really scary to be saved when the winds and the waves are still raging. But when the hand of Jesus is on you, that's when you're saved, not when the wind dies down. And circumstance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like recognizing and remembering in your side of your heart that Jesus can save you without the winds ever quieting is really, really, really important.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we wait for the wind to die down before we trust in Jesus. And Peter cries out before the wind ever dies down and is saved. Anyway, there's lots of little nuance in there, but it's so fun to like point that out because I think it's really important.
Another big thing to understand everything that's going on here in the original author's mind and in all the disciples in Jesus' mind, I'm assuming, which is water and spirits.
Mm-hmm.
So in the ancient world, in the world they lived in, and the world of the ancient Israelites, water is chaos. There are 1-to-1 in stories, but also like in life, you walk out and water is a picture of chaos, especially on the Sea of Galilee.
It can't be controlled. It's not like ground where it can be tilled or, it's very, very hard to control.
Can't be controlled. And especially on the Sea of Galilee, it's in a small basin surrounded by mountains. And if you've ever been to like Denver or somewhere like that on the edge of a mountain range, you know that the weather can come over those mountains and surprise you so quickly, because when it's up that high, even meteorologists, when it's up that high, it's hard to see how it would affect lower. So it's harder to predict what'll happen when that weather crests the mountain. So they are in a boat. They're fishermen. They're trained chaos navigators. And this is still chaotic for them and has held them at a standstill for a long time. But the chaos isn't just neutral. We come into this with a modernist mindset.
Mm-hmm.
We say Jesus walked on water, and the questions we want to ask are about him being an illusionist. Did he have something special? Was there salt content of the water? Was there a glass plate under the water that just made it look like he was doing that? Was there whatever? Like when we try to recreate those scenes today for like The Chosen or some other depiction of Jesus or somebody doing that, there's some movie magic going on. There's some illusion, some things going on to where the actor's safe, but the stunt still looks like it happened.
Yep. When
they saw that, they would not have thought illusionist. They would not have thought, what's the science, rationale, whatever. They come in at it with their premodern mindset, which is what spiritual realities are making this break of the laws of physics happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the same with the chaos and the wind. If you remember, or if we've ever said it on here before, the word in Greek and Hebrew, I'm going to say this very loosely, but it's roughly true in both, is the word is the same for wind, for breath, and for spirit. In Greek, it's pneuma. In Hebrew, it's ruach.
Mm-hmm. Did that earlier. Not on purpose.
And so wind and spirit and breath are all sort of the same. When God breathed his spirit into Adam and Eve at the beginning, he's breathing his breath into them. He's breathing, did I say spirit? Mm-hmm. When he's breathing the breath of life into them, he's breathing the spirit of life into them and the wind of life into them. Same word. Mm-hmm. Trying to think of another good example. And then this is the one that's the most pertinent. I'm just going to read it. Okay, going back to Genesis 1:1, the very first verse in the Bible.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was void and shapeless, And the Spirit of God hovered over the water.
Yes, the Spirit, the Ruach, the breath, or the wind of God hovered over the waters. So when the wind is tossing these waves on the Sea of Galilee, they're not inherently thinking, the Doppler radar picked up the wind patterns and this is just Mother Nature. This is just how the wind works and it's just whatever. They're thinking there are spirits that are antagonistic to us and we assume are antagonistic to God on the waters. We are at the mercy of these spirits, these winds, tossing us around on the water.
We are in that chaos.
Yes. Now, Jesus shows up and they say, it's a ghost. It's a spirit. It's a wind.
And he's like, yes. Wrong one, though.
Yes. In English, this will be very confusing and not seem to apply at all. But in all of God's pictures in Scripture of what his sovereignty, his rule, his rulership looks like over creation, in all of those pictures, the water is still.
Yep.
And sometimes, especially at the end of the Bible, they'll say it's clear as glass or still as glass or crystal, where it is like so clear.
Those pictures you can't tell which one's the reflection and which one's the water.
You can see the reflection without ripples. You can see the reflection of the water because there are no ripples distorting it, whatever. That is a literary picture of God's perfect rulership over it. And so you could infer from all this worldview stuff that we've talked about, all this culture stuff, that the disciples are at the mercy of tormenting, tumultuous, antagonistic, mean spirits, tossing these waves around, and they're waiting for Jesus to come back because they've seen him exorcise demons and heal people. And a lot of the healings they see, they're also assuming are exorcising demons or something in a spiritual way other than just physical. And so when Jesus walks back out, he's a ghost. We're scared. We can see one of the spirits that's attacking us. But then it's Jesus, and all of a sudden they know Jesus, and he's unaffected by
the chaos.
These spirits. You know what it reminds me of is Psalm 46, which the whole thing applies. But this is the sort of attitude that you have when you put your confidence in God in the face of tumultuous other spirits. A lot of the verses in this are sort of famous. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her, and she will not fall. God will help her at the break of day. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice, the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see the works of the Lord, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear and burns the shields, or chariots sometimes, with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. A lot of these pictures of God at war are like he'll Thanos snap all of their best tools out of existence.
And he'll calm the things that have always felt like chaos and uncalmable mountains, mountains, waters.
And the unstoppable leaders of this world. So Ephesians, the prince of the power of the air, and we do not fight against flesh and blood, those sort of things. But also the worldly rulers, the kings of the earth, was this Revelation 6 at the end? The kings of the earth hide in the caves and ask rocks to fall on them and end this, whatever. So like all of this bends at his will when we see him rightly. So when Peter sees him rightly, in the middle of all these, why do the nations rage and plot in vain? He's looking at the seas and seeing, why do these spirits rage and plot in vain?
Yep.
When he sees Jesus. But before he sees Jesus, he's just saying, these spirits are raging and plotting.
So I had this thought that I couldn't figure out how, because it's so cool when you start to realize their perspective. But from my perspective, on the Western side of things, when I read this, and I think it's in the modern side, I had this thought that I couldn't figure out how to say that made sense in a concise way. And it really took too much to try to explain it. And I was like, we have a podcast for this exact reason. Yeah. So what I was thinking about was how Jesus is already defying wind by walking on water. So the way that the wind and our jet streams and our weather systems are brought into being is by our planet rotating on its axis. And that rotation is what creates this thing called gravity. And it also is what creates our systems. It's all of that is entailed in that concept, which is modern science. So by him defying gravity, defying the way that the water works, and walking, it's already a greater miracle than calming wind.
Here's my question. Is he defying gravity, which is from the rotation of the earth and the mass of the earth, just how large it is? Is he defying gravity? Can he like spacewalk and like do the big jumps? Or is he defying the give of water being a liquid?
In my mind, if water...
Are his feet treating water as a solid? Like if he jumps at that moment, does he have a taller vertical than he did before?
That's
a question no one can answer. I'm just so curious.
It's already a demonstration of something that's defying what nature is supposed to do. I guess that's my whole thought is I'm like, they're mad at nature, and I'm like, what he's doing is defying nature. Yeah. Like, there's no reason you should be afraid of anything else. From my like modern perspective, I'm just kind of like, what he's doing is harder than saying wind stop. Yeah. Because like water's an animate thing, like wind, and this is what I love that I didn't get to say, wind can't do anything on its own. It has to push you. It has to throw something.
All of wind's effects are relational.
They're all potential. Yeah. It's potential of what wind can do. But wind itself, it's not like there's a wind so strong on this earth that it just rips you in half. Like, no, it'll pick you up and throw you, but it can't just like tear you apart. Yeah. So the concept of that is like what he's looking at and is fearful of is what wind could do rather than being in awe.
He's not fearful that wind will push him over. He's fearful that wind will cause a wave that will crash another boat and they'll die.
He's more afraid of what the wind can do than what Jesus can do. And that was
when
the whole,
he starts to
when
sink.
the whole thing is when he's in the right place, he's more focused on what Jesus is doing than what the wind can do. Mm-hmm. And I guess that was the whole crux of my sermon, is trying to get to that place where it's like, if you could see what Jesus is doing accurately in the chaos, then everything else melts away. It doesn't matter. But the minute you start to looking at what all the other things potentially can do is when your faith falters.
Yeah. So for example, we live in Mount Vernon. There are many minds at work trying to do things to Mount Vernon. Yep. That sounds very evil the way I said it. But like there are small business owners who would like to get more business out of Mount Vernon and the surrounding areas. There are builders who would like to build in certain zones in Mount Vernon and who would like to build duplexes or multifamily, whatever, not just two family. And they would like to impose that will on Mount Vernon. Yep. And there are people who own larger businesses and there's the education system who would like to see things happen in Mount Vernon.
There's a couple churches too.
And there's some churches that would like to see their will happen in Mount Vernon. Mm-hmm. But if the president shows up and the National Guard shows up, all of us throw our plans out the window because we got no chance. They're doing something and they're going to get their thing done. And then everybody when they leave, we get to resume. Yep. And that is what's happening with Jesus and all the other powers, although they're all still trying to rage and plot. But like Psalm 46 and maybe some other Psalms would say, they're raging and plotting in vain.
In vain.
And that's the upsetting thing about Peter, although maybe he's prideful, maybe he's at play, maybe he's whatever, but when he diverts his attention from the most powerful to the most loud, he diverts his attention away from the most powerful and starts relying on his fear of the loudest thing rather than trust in the most powerful thing. And that makes him sink.
And it's crazy because the way that Matthew ends this section is they get to the other side after all this goes down, which this is the first time the disciples worship him, not just declare who he is, but bow down and are like, you are the true Son of God. This thing that happened with Peter was such a ridiculously intense, like altering thing that they're all like, yeah, surely you are, truly you are. And then he gets to the other side, a bunch of people show up, and any and everybody that touches him, doesn't even have to like, just touches him, is healed. And it's wild that like he goes from feeding the 5,000, walking on water and getting worshiped by his disciples, to then just healing any and all that can find him. And in fact, it says this is, I think, one of the first times where, and it might be the only time in Matthew, I believe, where it's the touch his cloak.
Yeah.
Like it's not him personally going like, and you're healed, Jimmy, and you're here, Deborah. This is like, they just come up, touch, done.
Yeah.
There's not conversation. It just seems to be just like crowds of people. Now, it doesn't go into detail, but it definitely is telling you that like, this is where Jesus is displaying in a very real way that his very presence is going to bring healing. Like his very presence is what the world needs. And it's obviously he's demonstrating it in a deeper way with his messages, that he doesn't just come to heal the sick because the sick need heal. He comes to demonstrate that the sick are being healed, to demonstrate and to display his kingdom that is ultimately going to heal the world and bring a new kingdom.
And my favorite, the thing that gets me so much out of this is you read all that. He feeds 5,000 people with not enough food for like 2 people. And then he walks on water, defying nature itself, and in their mind, defying all these tumultuous spirits against God.
Or just pure chaos, too.
Yeah.
Or just like what is out of control in the world.
And then and I have so much more I want to say about that. But then he comes and just the clothes that are touching him are healing people.
It's wild.
Chapter 15. Then some Pharisees and teachers of the law came to Jesus from Jerusalem and asked, "Why do your disciples break the traditions of the elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat." Get out of here. What is that? Did he not what?
That's so frustrating. You want to review that. That's the very next verse.
We didn't even preach that. I just want to say that is right next to this.
And that'll be just like a beautiful intro into the next time we do it, of just like, look at how easy it is to miss out on the amazing things that God is doing if you hold on to a specific idea of what you think Jesus is supposed to look like. Hey, this is a great discussion. I know there's plenty more that you and I could talk about.
I'm going to say one last thing.
Right,
it's going to be so quick. It's going to be so quick. Okay, so I was listening to some modern Old Testament scholars, and they're talking about Genesis 1, and a lot of times people come to the creation story, and they say, well, what's the point of this? Was it created in 6 literal days or in 6 periods or whatever? And I've heard all these modern Old Testament scholars say, the point isn't that God created anything. The point is that God ordered things and put them in their right place where they can flourish. He's delegating responsibilities. He's doing whatever. They'll tell you, look at how many things come into material being, and it's not very many in all 7 days. He said God doesn't create out of nothing in these passages. Maybe he does. Maybe that's evident from other parts. But what does he do when he creates space? The starting picture is the Spirit hovering over the waters, which are just there. And the next thing he does is separate light from dark, which are apparently already there. And then he separates the waters above from the water below, which is already there. And then he separates the water from the dry ground, which is already there, maybe covered up by water. And then he puts the sun, moon, and stars in place to govern, to properly function, to delegate to them the responsibility of keeping time and all these things. Okay, so then Jesus comes out here, and Peter's at play in the midst of this tumultuous storm. Peter gets scared. He starts to sink. Jesus saves him, puts him back on the boat, and then without even looking, without even snapping his fingers, we assume, puts it back in order, puts it back to flourishing.
So they can get to the shore.
Yes. The picture of unorder and order in the beginning of Genesis is that of a wilderness versus a farm or a garden. And that's why he plants a garden. He doesn't create a garden out of nowhere. He orders
the wilderness,
an area in the wilderness to flourish as a garden. He puts it all in its place. Anyway, okay. So that about the spirits that are rampaging and all whatever. Jesus says tin hut, and they all just like snap into place.
And I think that's the whole idea too of like your circumstances don't have to change to have the proper perspective.
Yeah.
There's an Anthony Hopkins quote that says, "I will give you life, No, I will give you life, but it is your job to let me prune you so that it'll be fruitful. And that's the concept of like letting him garden your heart, letting him garden your life so that the things that need to fall off need to, and the things that need to remain can, and that's where fruit comes from. So, well, this is awesome. Like I said, we're trying to wring this passage out. It's always more and more. Timothy Keller used to say 25 minutes is the minimum of what it takes to get something new out of a passage. So if you ever want to find something new in a passage, 25 minutes is normally the minimum that you're going to have to spend. And that's just for one thing. And so, hey, as always, Mom, thanks so much for listening. Courtney, Peyton.
Yeah, Josie,
Zach.
We
love you. We have a few people now.
Yeah.
If you stayed this long, gold star. Leave a comment. Gold star.
Let us know how much you love Pandora hosting our podcast.
Yep. Leave a review over there.
Yeah.
Yep. Subscribe.
We need one.
Do all of them.
We need one.
Hey, thanks so much again for listening. Have a great and glorious day in the Lord. We'll see you later.
See ya.